Trump's latest economic weapon against Canada just exploded in his face, and it's revealing exactly why Prime Minister Mark Carney's steady approach might be the smartest play in this high-stakes trade war. While the world expected Canada to crumble under a crushing 35% tariff increase, something completely different happened. Instead of panic, we're seeing strategic patience. Instead of desperate concessions, we're witnessing calculated resistance. And instead of Trump getting what he wants, he might have just handed Carney the perfect opportunity to flip the entire game. So what exactly happened when Trump's tariff deadline hit? And why is Andrew Furey, the former premier of Newfoundland and Labrador, calling Carney's response the wisest strategy Canada could have chosen? To understand this, we need to break down the economics, the politics, and the psychology of what might be the most important trade standoff of the decade. On August 1st, 2025, Trump made good on his threat. The United States officially increased tariffs on Canadian imports to 35%, a massive jump from the previous 25% rate. This wasn't just a number on paper. This was Trump's attempt to force Canada into submission, to make them accept whatever deal he was offering, no matter how lopsided it might be. The message was clear: bend the knee or watch your economy suffer.
Get an extension, and Canada did not.
Well, I think it's because of the feeling in the room or the energy in the room when the negotiators are talking to each other. And, so the decision was made by our team, to the president. The president decided, let's give Mexico an extension, put the 35% tariff on Canada. But remember, this is for non-USMCA compliant products. So I've talked to your ambassador, the U.S. Ambassador Hillman. I think she's characterized Canada's position right now as one that lots of countries around the world would be envious of, because the effective tariff rate for Canada right now on all goods and services going into the U.S. is about 5%. That's not a bad place for Canada to be right now.
So if I understand your answer to that question correctly, you're saying it's the energy in the room is the reason why Canada got hit and Mexico did not?
Well, Canada really, number one, Canada really didn't get hit very hard. Okay?
But still got hit, and Mexico did not.
Mexico did not, and it's, the negotiators, I'm assuming, are sitting in the room and saying, okay, we're making, the negotiations that we're in right now with Mexico and where we believe we are headed, say, let's.
The disparity in treatment between Canada and Mexico raises serious questions. While Mexico received a 90-day extension on trade negotiations, Canada faced immediate tariffs. When pressed about this difference, U.S. officials struggled to provide concrete reasons, vaguely attributing it to negotiation dynamics and the atmosphere in the room. This evasive response suggests the decision may have been more about political pressure tactics than substantive trade concerns. But here's where Trump's calculation went wrong. The tariff increase only applies to Canadian goods that aren't COVAs, read under the Canada-United States-Mexico Agreement, or CUSMA. And here's the kicker. Roughly 90% of Canadian exports to the United States are actually exempt from these tariffs. That means the vast majority of Canada's cross-border trade continues flowing as normal, while Trump burns political capital on what amounts to economic theater.
U.S. is our largest customer. We respect them, but it has to go both ways. You can't have tariffs on one side and not the other. I still stand by what I say. Dollar for dollar, tariff for tariff. They understand strength, not weakness, and we should never, ever roll over and be weak. Okay, so let me be very clear. I'm 100% supportive of the Prime Minister and the federal government. And when you sit around at a family dinner table, you discuss all sorts of ideas, and that's what we're going to do. But
Canada's response has been firm and principled. The message from Canadian leadership has been clear. Respect must be mutual in trade relationships. The promise of dollar for dollar, tariff for tariff retaliation demonstrates Canada's unwillingness to be pushed around, emphasizing strength rather than weakness in negotiations. This approach recognizes that while the U.S. is Canada's largest customer, both nations need each other for economic prosperity. Andrew Furey saw this immediately. Speaking to CBC News, the former Newfoundland and Labrador premier praised what he called Carney's calm and rational approach. It's been a very wise and strategic, a cohesive approach on behalf of all Canadians, Fury explained. But his analysis went deeper than just trade numbers. Fury believes Trump's tariff threats reveal something far more sinister, an imperialistic agenda designed to create economic chaos so America can extract not only the value, but potentially even the land mass itself. This isn't hyperbole. Throughout 2025, Trump has repeatedly suggested that Canada should become the 51st American state, mocking Canadian leaders and threatening to use economic force to achieve his goals. When Carney visited the White House in May and told Trump that Canada was not for sale, Trump's response was ominous. Time will tell. But Carney's strategy isn't just about resisting American pressure, it's about fundamentally reshaping how Canada approaches trade relationships. While Trump expected Canada to come crawling back with concessions, Carney did something different. He acknowledged disappointment with the tariff increase, but then laid out a comprehensive plan to build Canadian economic resilience. The plan is ambitious and multifaceted. First, Canada is working with provinces and territories to eliminate internal trade barriers, creating what Carney calls one Canadian economy. Second, they're developing major nation-building projects with provincial, territorial, and Indigenous partners, initiatives that could catalyze over $500 billion in new investments. Third, and perhaps most importantly, they're diversifying trading relationships to reduce dependence on the United States. This last point is crucial, and it's where Mexico comes into play. Earlier this week, Finance Minister François-Philippe Champagne and Foreign Affairs Minister Anita Anand traveled to Mexico to boost economic ties. Fury sees this as essential strategic thinking. It's important that there's alignment and strategic thought processes existing between the partners like Canada and Mexico, he said. We're next to the United States, but we don't want to be relying on the United States. The Mexico connection isn't just about trade diversification, it's about CUSMA renegotiation leverage. If Trump tries to reopen the trade agreement, having a strong alliance with Mexico could be the difference between a fair deal and American domination. Mexico itself got a 90-day reprieve from Trump's tariff threats, suggesting that the administration recognizes the complexity of managing multiple trade relationships simultaneously. Meanwhile, Canadian businesses are already adapting. In St. John's, Colonial Auto Parts President Doug Squires stopped working with U.S. suppliers last spring and has been building relationships with offshore suppliers. Everything is going according to plan, Squires reported, suggesting that Canadian companies saw this coming and prepared accordingly. But the real genius of Carney's approach becomes clear when you look at the political dynamics. Provincial leaders across Canada have expressed complete support for the Prime Minister's handling of the situation. The tariffs have already cost the U.S. auto industry billions of dollars, eliminated thousands of manufacturing jobs, and pushed factory employment to 5-year lows. These economic realities are forcing American businesses to reconsider the wisdom of trade wars with their closest ally. Trump's aggressive tactics aren't just failing to intimidate Canada, they're uniting Canadians against American economic imperialism. Fury captured this perfectly when he said the tariffs represent an attack on our industries, an attack on our resources, an attack on our historic and lengthy friendship. But rather than weakening Canadian resolve, these attacks seem to be strengthening it. The economic reality also supports Carney's patient approach. While Trump raised tariffs on some Canadian goods to 35%, the average tariff rate on Canadian exports remains one of the lowest for any U.S. trading partner, thanks to CUSMA exemptions. The sectors that are heavily impacted, lumber, steel, aluminum, and automobiles, are exactly the areas where Canada is now promising to protect Canadian jobs, invest in industrial competitiveness, buy Canadian, and diversify export markets. Canada's comprehensive industrial strategy acknowledges the reality that major industries, including autos, steel, aluminum, copper, pharmaceuticals, semiconductors, and softwood lumber are being impacted by U.S. trade actions. The government has announced substantial support packages, including hundreds of millions in loan guarantees and grants for affected sectors. This proactive approach to helping Canadian companies retool and reinvest demonstrates a commitment to long-term economic resilience rather than short-term concessions. This is where Trump's strategy reveals its fundamental flaw. By targeting specific sectors rather than achieving comprehensive leverage, he's given Canada a roadmap for economic independence. Every tariff becomes an incentive for Canadian businesses to find non-American suppliers, customers, and partners. Every threat becomes a reason for Canadian consumers to choose domestic alternatives. The international context makes Carney's strategy even smarter. Trump isn't just fighting Canada, he's simultaneously imposing steep tariffs on Brazil, India, Taiwan, and dozens of other countries.
Okay, so let me be very clear. I'm 100% supportive of the Prime Minister and the federal government. And when you sit around at a family dinner table, you discuss all sorts of ideas, and that's what we're going to do. But just in the last 3 months, we've seen the U.S. auto industry face $6.2 billion in tariff-related costs, with most of them projecting significantly higher costs for the year. We're looking at 37,000 manufacturing jobs that have disappeared in the U.S., and factory employment is the lowest it's been in 5 years, which is not a good thing. And you see what happens with President Trump. Someone gives them the wrong job numbers that are accurate job numbers, they get fired. Well, you know, President Trump has to realize it's costing companies billions of dollars. Procter & Gamble cost them $1 billion. You look at Mattel, you look at all the Ford Motor Company and all the auto companies. He said it would create economic growth. He said it would create jobs. I went out there at the same time and said it's going to be a disaster. Tariff on Canada is going to be a tax on Americans. So far, this is what's happened. It's hurting.
This scattered approach dilutes American leverage while creating opportunities for alternative partnerships. When you're fighting everyone, you're not really fighting anyone effectively. Politically, Carney is in a strong position. He won Canada's federal election in April by casting himself as the person best equipped to handle U.S.-Canada relations. His campaign promise was to take on Trump, who he accused of wanting to break us so America can own us. By refusing to accept a bad deal and instead focusing on Canadian economic resilience, Carney is delivering on that promise. Even Carney's political rivals are supporting his approach. Conservative Party leader Pierre Poilievre called the tariffs unjustified and said Carney should accept nothing short of a deal that ends all U.S. tariffs on Canada. The Canadian Chamber of Commerce praised the Prime Minister for prioritizing a strong, future-focused deal over a rushed one. When your political opponents are supporting your trade strategy, you know you're on solid ground. But perhaps the most telling sign of Carney's success is Trump's changing tone. While Trump once called Carney a nice gentleman, he recently shifted to saying that Canada has been very poorly led. This isn't the language of someone who's winning. It's the frustrated rhetoric of someone whose pressure tactics aren't working. The broader lesson here is about the psychology of international negotiations. Trump's approach assumes that economic pressure automatically translates to political compliance. But Canada's response demonstrates that sometimes the best strategy is to absorb short-term costs in exchange for long-term independence. By refusing to panic, by building alternative relationships, and by focusing on domestic strength, Canada is essentially calling Trump's bluff. This strategy carries risks, of course. The affected Canadian sectors, steel, aluminum, lumber, and automobiles, are facing real economic pain. Workers in these industries are dealing with genuine hardship while their government plays a longer game. But Carney's response includes specific promises to protect these jobs and invest in industrial competitiveness.
The United States in the pursuit of the best deal for both sides. And I'll be speaking more about how we can reinforce these commitments in short order. But despite our advantages, certain of our major Canadian industries are being severely impacted by U.S. trade. These strategic sectors include autos, steel, aluminum, copper, pharmaceuticals, semiconductors, and of course, softwood lumber. So while we'll continue to work with the United States on the many mutually beneficial opportunities that we share in trade and investment, it is clear that we cannot count or fully rely on what has been our most valued trading relationship for our prosperity. And that's why we're increasingly focused on building our strength at home and finding new opportunities for Canadian companies and workers abroad. Our government's new comprehensive industrial...
Suggesting that the government understands the human cost of their strategy. The Mexico relationship will be crucial going forward. If Canada and Mexico can present a united front in future CUSMA negotiations, they'll have much more leverage than either country would possess alone. Trump's decision to give Mexico a 90-day extension while immediately implementing the Canada tariff increase suggests he recognizes this dynamic and is trying to prevent Mexican-Canadian coordination. Looking ahead, the success of Carney's strategy will depend on execution. Can Canada actually diversify its trading relationships quickly enough to reduce American leverage? Can they build the domestic industrial capacity to replace American suppliers? Can they maintain political unity in the face of sustained economic pressure? The early signs are promising. Canadian businesses are already adapting. Canadian consumers are supporting domestic alternatives, and Canadian politicians are presenting a rare united front. Meanwhile, Trump is discovering that economic warfare against your closest ally and largest trading partner creates complications he didn't anticipate. Fury's assessment that this represents an existential threat to Canada might be correct. But existential threats can also create existential opportunities. By forcing Canada to reduce its dependence on the United States, Trump might be inadvertently creating a more economically independent and internationally connected Canada. The ultimate irony is that Trump's tariff weapon, designed to force Canadian submission, might end up achieving the opposite result. Instead of making Canada more dependent on American markets, it's pushing Canada toward economic diversification. Instead of weakening Canadian resolve, it's strengthening national unity. Instead of proving American dominance, it's demonstrating the limits of economic coercion against a prepared and determined neighbor. As this trade conflict continues to evolve, Andrew Fury's praise for Carney's slow and steady approach is looking increasingly prescient. In a world where political leaders often feel pressured to respond immediately to every provocation, sometimes the wisest strategy is patience, preparation, and long-term thinking. Trump wanted a quick victory through economic intimidation. Instead, he might have just given Canada the motivation and opportunity to build a more resilient, independent economic future. The question now isn't whether Canada can survive Trump's tariffs, it's whether Trump can achieve his goals while Canada systematically reduces its vulnerability to American economic pressure. Based on the early evidence, Carney's strategy of building Canada strong rather than bending to American demands might be exactly what this moment requires.